Hi, welcome to Macro Without Maths. Your macro may be out of date. It's tricky to keep up when you've been working on micro, as many professional economists do. And macroeconomics has moved on quite a lot in the last 30 years. Now, a lot of it is done with algebraic means, which is good. You can get things that you can't do just with words. But it can make it not as accessible. So my job will be to bring you up to speed with your macro so you understand the sort of basic workhorse models, as they're called, which are used in modern macroeconomics teaching, and indeed are the basis of many forecasting models used by various institutions. We will be using basic slides on the course. So here's the one we started with. And as you see, you're going to get a free mini textbook as well, which I think is easier to read than most textbooks. I take you through relatively painless, if I can, to the sort of frontier of modern models, and it should be a good stepping stone to more formalized treatments in some of the excellent textbooks that are around, such as, say, Carling and Soskis. I say this is the mainstream approach, and just to get you up to speed, because probably all economists feel that we should know what's going on in macro. So here's the syllabus. I'm going to discuss the distinction between macro versus micro. Obviously, it's tempting to say it's big versus small. That's not really the whole story at all, although macro does deal with aggregates. So I will look at that distinction. We will be using in a closed economy, and it will be the UK economy that we traced as our sort of examples. Could be any economy, but obviously I'm in the UK, so let's choose that one. Well, I'm going to start with an overview of macro policy. This is very salutary. I think it's very important to look at policy to see where it was wrong, perhaps in the past, as learn from mistakes, etc., and to see that, you know, there's always a level of uncertainty in macro, and often it's events rather than sort of marginal scientific progress that changes our view of macro. Anyway, that's from the Great Depression in the 30s, etc. Nothing great about it, of course. That was a real world event, had a big impact. Keynes came in. He had a debate with the classics, as he called it. I think more neoclassical, really. But anyway, I will just explain the classical dichotomy, which is quite a good starting point, really, to see the different sort of approaches and perspectives of neoclassical versus Keynes. Then I described the Keynesian golden era, Bretton Woods, etc. And that went through to sort of late 60s, early 70s, when stagflation really set it off, a resurgence of really neoclassical thinking, called the monetarist experiment, still is sometimes, but it really is a resurgence of a more neoclassical approach, looking at the sort of economy as a real world phenomena created from real things rather than sort of policy things. We will describe the neoclassical synthesis, which was used as the main workhorse teaching model for a very long time. Right up until the 90s, still is used quite a lot in many places, and that has an IS and an LM. We're going to see the IS has quite a longevity, is still around and active. LM has changed in interpretation. The neoclassical synthesis had an output sector. You can do a full-blooded, steady state growth kind of equilibrium of neoclassical models. Again, part of my job is to simplify, with avoiding too much distortion, but, you know, to communicate the essence of things. So we will look at a labour market, but say the principles and ideas extend to a full production function and growth models. Look at the nature of money, which turns out to be very important. The textbooks are still out of date, I think, having a sort of explicit hard based money multiplier, a sort of fractional reserve for the deposits, some sort of fixed ratio or something to base money reserves. And so that's kind of moved on. and I'll be using an Apple mouse, that's quite sensitive. But it turns out that money isn't necessarily exogenous in this way, and that you can't really control the volume of money so easily, as we found out in the neoclassical resurgence of monetarism. Money supply can be very difficult to control. It's very changeable, fungible, and whatever. But it's quite important for the relative strengths of fiscal, monetary policy, etc., and how the economy behaves. So that will take us through then to the more modern macro models, which have developed since the sort of 90s through to today. Endogenous money, as I just explained, is there. Efficiency wages we look at, and these give Keynesian results, and they give a micro foundation to the notion of why there might be involuntary unemployment. Then the three equation model, which is a major workhorse model, still very important. It has been extended in many ways. It's got a separate life of its own, but you can include it as the family of DSG models as well, with shocks and permutations put in. But that will lead to the very neoclassical DSGE, dynamic stochastic general equilibrium real business cycle model, which has very neoclassical qualities and predictions. The classical dichotomy rules in real business cycle, and then you can extend the real business cycle DSGE to a new Keynesian DSGE, and we'll have a quick look at that and discuss the sort of properties of that. In some ways, you can consider this as a more generalized version of the real business cycle. So that's more or less the syllabus, and my job to sort of go through events, the major events that have affected macroeconomics, and see how the sort of modern models that have come out of these events and the developments in economic theory, fairly mainstream, workhorse, basic models, get you up to speed. I'll be using graphs. Well, you should be familiar with graphs as an economist, of course. Even if elements such as the wave setting curve you may be rusty on, or never actually were put in your economics macro at university. So these will be fairly easy. Sometimes the graphs a little bit more complicated, but there we are. Develop models to try and show things in an easy to understand way. And diagrams are quite good. I mean, maths can be a bit of a black box if you're not careful. You put the results in, crank the parameters, outcomes, an equilibrium condition or something, and then you have to interpret it. So diagrams can be quite good. We'll have some more colourful diagrams as well. Here's one, and this was going through the financial crisis. And again, just descriptively looking at these things and discussing them can be quite useful. It makes you a more rounded economist. You don't want to be completely sort of constrained by models. You know, models are to be used, not to be believed. They're useful tools, but if they stop you thinking about the economy fluently, then you know you need to get out and get your shoes dirty more. Look at the real world. And data, of course, particularly I use graphs of data. So here's one where we, in recession, then sort of freed from the constraints of the exchange rate mechanism. Remember that? I'll refresh your memory. And then we had a period of what was nice, and that's non-inflationary continuous expansion. A time when economists were riding high, macroeconomists were boasting we've cracked macro. Perhaps that was a euphemism, who knows? But up to the Great Crisis, and then financial crisis. Then, of course, there was this sort of rather very, well, a sluggish recovery until, well, you know what, COVID-19, which we will have a quick look at the end, and that some of these models will be useful to understand what's going on there, although each crisis can have its own characteristics. Okay, that would be my job. It's online non-participants, I'm afraid. We will have versions later on where there'll be sort of real-time tutorials, but at the moment it's just videos which you can watch, and I will go through from fairly elementary up to pretty advanced stuff. The easy stuff, of course, you can fast forward through. The more difficult stuff, you can rewind and look at it again and go through the notes. And at the end of it, I say, you should be in a good position to go on to more formal treatments, more in-depth, more detailed books such as macroeconomics, Carling and Soskis, and then on things like Roma, etc. That's my job. Hope you enjoy the course and that you find it useful. Thank you.